Peace, everyone. Welcome to Journey to Self Inc.'s Please Ask campaign. I am Aniqua Acree, the founder and executive director of the Georgia based nonprofit Journey to Self, or as I like to call it, J2S. As a reminder, the Please Ask campaign is a community engagement campaign throughout today and the remainder of the week. You all will journey with us as we bring awareness to childhood sexual abuse, aid in the healing of survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and provide training to people in children's lives so that they are empowered to please ask kids questions about sexual abuse. So today's session, we are featuring our guest speaker, Miss Alba. I am so eager to share space with her. But before we begin, to all of our viewers, please note that the information you hear today may be triggering. So if you believe that you and or someone you know has experienced sexual abuse, please call the National Sexual Abuse Hotline. Their phone number is 1-800-656-4673. And I will also be sure to tag that information in this post. So, Ava, can you please tell everyone who's viewing who you are and share a little about yourself?
Awesome. I'm so excited and honored to be here in this space. Thank you for welcoming me into this
Of
journey with you.
course.
It is such an honor. My name is Alba Cordero Soto, and I am a resilient survivor. I am a transformational speaker, an author, and a trauma liberation coach,
Mm.
among a few other titles,
Right?
mom being one of them. I have other roles that I also fulfill because we do wear many hats, but that's in essence who I am. And I am the founder of Alba Soto TLC, which is my business where I provide trauma liberation coaches to individuals who have experienced trauma so that they can begin a life where they're no longer feeling shackled and living with that shame, guilt, and anger, but ultimately living in the light and feeling that sense of liberation that comes with the healing process.
Yes. Oh my gosh. We are so honored just to have you and your participation with our campaign, especially as it relates to day one, our kickoff day, which is just the perfect time to set the foundation behind this sexual abuse awareness campaign. So I think it's very important that we start by defining exactly what childhood sexual abuse is. Do you think you can provide, that definition for us?
So the thing is that aside from the textbook definition of childhood sexual abuse, I think it's important to understand that childhood sexual abuse looks different for different people, and
Mhm.
people experience abuse in different ways.
Right.
So, for example, it is an unnecessary advance of a child that is of age that cannot consent, right?
Right.
It may or may not include consent because the underage makes it so that you can't consent, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
And then what are the different acts that a person could be participating in that could be seen as an unwanted sexual advance? It could be different things, right? So
Right.
one of the most um, uh, I think easiest things that most people think about is rape, right?
Right.
And sexual abuse doesn't always equal penetration. It's
Very
important to
true.
understand and acknowledge that other forms of sexual advances also are considered unwanted sexual advances when it
Yes.
includes a child. So that could include inappropriate touch.
Hmm.
It could include introduction, like showing of bodily parts, like right. So
Right.
showing bodily parts to someone
Yes.
unwantedly. It could include showing pornographic images. So it could be a picture of some sort or a video of some sort.
Right.
Um, and oftentimes, one of the things that many people don't like talk about or acknowledge is also some of the trauma that happens from one child to another. So it could be that one child experienced sexual abuse, and then now that they have been open to the bodily pleasure, right? So,
Right.
and that's the thing, like sexual abuse can happen with or without a physical pleasurable response. So for some people, they think that because they experience pleasure, or because
Mhm.
their body reacted in a way that biologically meant that they welcomed this experience, that meant that they weren't abused. But it
Right,
can
right.
be with or without pleasure. So it could be painful, or it could not be painful for some individuals. And again, going back to some of the child on child sexual abuse that happens as well, it
Mhm.
is that oftentimes if a child has been exposed to um, sexual abuse, that now they're going to go and experiment this with other children of their
Yep.
age group. It could be children of the same sex or of the opposite sex. And many of us have either experienced this as children, or have heard of or have seen situations like this where children are playing house, where children
Right,
are touching
right.
themselves. And there is a form of exploration that is, normal for a certain developmental stage, but there's other things that is not. So it's a little bit of a gray line in terms
Right.
of whether that is or isn't considered abuse. And many individuals that have experienced that level of abuse could go their whole entire lives confused and not really knowing how to understand, how to interpret this, thing, not
Right.
calling it sexual abuse because they weren't actually abused by an adult, but they
Yes.
did at a young age get exposed to sexual activity by another child that they hadn't otherwise have been exposed to. So that also
Right.
happens and causes a lot of confusion around that as well.
Definitely. Wow. Everything you said, one, I resonate with it because it just brought me back to different encounters that I personally experienced, being a survivor, myself of childhood sexual abuse, but also just the different dynamics that experience just brought to my friendships, and my relationships with other children. And since we're speaking about children and the fact that, I too am a mom now, so I am now raising two children. And with technology, playing such a integral part in our day-to-day activities. I must admit, my kids, I have an 8-year-old and I have a 2-year-old, and they have access to phones and tablets and internet access just overall. So another point or another topic that I would like to talk about is what exactly are your thoughts or your opinions as it relates to how we can talk to our children about internet usage as we try to, continue to protect them online from predators as it relates to sexual abuse?
Okay. So I think that that's a very interesting question. And the question goes a little bit deeper first.
Yeah.
And it starts with the conversation with our children at a very young age around understanding their body and like naming those bodily things. So it's like making sure that the children know that they have a voice and that they can exercise their voice, that
Mhm.
they can express, yes or no,
Right.
that they can consent to certain things. So I think that that's like a deeper kind of conversation that starts at an earlier age that can help
Mhm.
empower children to make decisions that are wiser as they begin to explore the internet and kind of the different challenges that go on in the world. So for example, as soon as a child can talk, for me, I think it's important for them to understand the actual names of the different bodily parts. So
Right.
it's like, no, this is not your cookie, this is your
Okay. Or your
vagina.
hoo-ha. Right.
This is your penis, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and one of the challenging things is once they know what it is, it's like, I touch my penis, touch my
Right.
penis. It's like, yes, but
They're always
no
saying
one
it now.
else can touch your penis, right? And then again, just trying to have those conversations with the
Yeah.
2-year-old can be rather entertaining at times, and embarrassing at other times. Like,
Right.
I don't want to hear in the middle of a Zoom meeting that you're touching your penis while I'm in the middle of a meeting with my colleague. Okay, it's just
Right.
not appropriate, right? So I think it starts with really helping to empower them from a language capacity perspective, as opposed to trying to cause shame around some of these bodily organs that we have that are an integral part of our body. And I feel like our voice is a huge integral part of our body that oftentimes gets stifled when it comes to sexual trauma. So helping to empower children to find their voice and to exercise their voice as often as they can be a really helpful tool, so that when they do navigate some of these more challenging situations, they know that they can speak up. They know that they can share this information, right? So the tricky thing is that when it comes to the internet, there's all these suggestions that start coming up that you start on one thing and then it brings you here and brings you there and brings you there. And we all know, we all have social media. We all start scrolling. We all, are easily distracted in this day and age. And with all the different social media platforms between TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and all of these little short videos, it really takes a very little amount of time for the children to get exposed to something that could have a long-term consequence or effect on their brain and on their psyche. Wow. So it's very important to help them to understand like what is and what isn't appropriate. And when they do see something that is inappropriate, understand that they don't have to carry that shame, that they don't have to feel like it's their fault, right? Saying there's algorithms, there's suggestions. You started with Peppa Pig and Peppa Pig brought you to surprise LOL, open up whatever. And then next thing you know, you're looking at someone topless. Like,
exactly.
I get it. It happens. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with you. I'm telling you that this world is a sick world, and there's algorithms that are trained to be able to help expose you to things that you're not age appropriate for. So let's just kind of start there. Start by removing the shame and guilt and being able to have open dialogue around how these things may affect you, not just in the present moment in terms of carrying that guilt and shame and not really wanting to talk about it. And that's when you learn to begin to keep secrets, right? So we want to begin to avoid that idea of feeling like I'm so ashamed that I don't want to tell my mom or my dad about this, right? So being able to break that secrecy and being able to break that shame, because if I find out that you were exposed to pornography on the internet and I'm coming over here and I'm giving you a whooping and I'm this and I'm that, what is that teaching you? It's teaching you that you have to keep it a secret from me, because if not, you're going to get in trouble. So coming to it from a more informative approach, and also a more like, it is not your fault. It happens. And even if you did click on it intentionally, okay, here we are. Now we're having this conversation. Let's talk about how this would impact maybe future relationships with you in terms of how you view, interpersonal relationships and sexuality and things of that nature. And there's amazing tools out there to also begin to talk to individuals and children who have been exposed to pornography about what does pornography do to the brain, right? So then I always try to find age appropriate materials to be able to educate them to help supplement my mommy talk, because my mommy talk can talk to them for an hour and they're like, huh?
Right. What?
I love philosophically correlating things and they're just like, I lost you after the first 10 minutes, Ma. Like, I'm here, but after the first 10 minutes, it went over my head. So also incorporating other educational tools can be really helpful, so that they're hearing the same thing from different individuals or from different perspectives, so that it can be able to hit home. And of course, restricting access is one thing, but it's not a perfect thing, because they will go over someone's house. They will, have other situations. So it's important to also ask, like, what are you being exposed to when you go to your friend's house or your dad's house or this person's house, to begin to have that dialogue as well.
Right. Wow. I mean, so many big takeaways from everything. First of all, in my mind, as you were talking, I'm like, oh, I can do this better. Like, because I definitely, one, can just talk to my kid. And, she's doing like the, okay, but incorporating, age-friendly material, graphics, videos, especially things that she's more drawn towards at her current age group. I can definitely see that being a lot more beneficial than feeling like she's getting a talking to, from mommy. So I appreciate that insight for sure. And I can't
Another
wait.
thing
Yeah.
another thing I want to share, because I have personal experience with my son who was exposed to pornography at the age of 4. And at first, that was a very hard conversation to have. And
Mhm.
sometimes being able to acknowledge our own trauma and our own transferred trauma that we have when we
Right.
recognize that our children innocence has been stolen from them in a way that we also similarly experience
Right.
at a similar age. So there are some triggers that can happen, and those triggers can prevent us from having the conversation or make it so that we're having a difficult time having this conversation in a way that we
Exactly.
may miss some very obvious signs. So the hypervigilance can make it difficult for us to see clearly.
Yeah.
So I find it very good, like a good practice, to be transparent and share that reality with my children. So what I say to my son, who I wasn't till a few years later, like he was probably about 10 when I
Hmm.
realized, wow, my son was sexually abused by being exposed to pornography at the age of 4. And that
Right.
totally messed with
Wow.
him. And still to
Yeah.
this day, he has a porn addiction that if he did have access to a phone or technology, he would impulsively watch porn.
Right.
And
Right.
that is something that is very common with individuals who are exposed to pornography at a very young age. So I
Hmm.
had to share with him and I had to say, Isaiah, your mom was sexually abused when she was a child. And because I was sexually abused when I was a child, I had a difficult time with feeling shame and guilt around certain things. And I
Right.
found a really hard time really coming to grips that I was sexually abused. And it really affected my relationships and the way I related to my body. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you too are having any of these experiences. And I don't want
Right.
to feel like I'm rubbing off all of these things on you. Maybe you're not experiencing any of these. Maybe you're experiencing one of them and not all of these. But I'm just letting you know that personally, this is what I experienced. And it was right around that age that I started, to be introduced to these things. And it did affect me like long term. So if
Right.
ever
Right.
something comes up and you start feeling shame or guilt,
I
maybe you feel
love it.
nothing now, but feel free
Right.
talking to me about it, because it can be hard if you're going through it by yourself. And I
Yes.
can relate. So feel free to talk to me about it. So that was something that I also did. So kind of having that transparency, which can be awkward
Right.
at first, but having that shared reality can make it so that you're no longer coming from a place of hypervigilance, but you're actually coming from a place of authentic, genuine concern. And you're also sharing, like, I too struggle this. So it's not like I'm talking down to you, but I'm like on the
Right.
same
Or
level with you.
judging. Right. Yes. And I just want to highlight the importance of what you said, communicating with our kids and being open and honest. I know for me, I actually was postponing even just the sex talk, with my oldest daughter, because in my mind, I'm like, ah, she doesn't really know about these things yet. And then when she was maybe like, in all honesty, and I think I probably shared this with you before, but she was probably about 5, maybe first grade or something. And she comes home and she shares a story that she heard from like another classmate. And she's like, yeah, so, his cousin like tried to like stick something in his bottom. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. And she was like, so basically that was like sex, right? And I'm like, how do you like win? And so it's so funny because as parents, I feel like we try to delay, the sex talk, or we think, because of our own discomforts or because of whatever, healing that we're postponing, we think that we can also just delay educating our kids. But in all honesty, they know a lot more than we think they know. And I just like to also take a moment and like humble myself and allow myself to understand that I would much rather my kid receive this information from me than a classmate or than, the world or a music
Music.
video or a rap song, right? So it's like, yeah, why not? Why not have these conversations?
It
And
doesn't
earlier,
make having the conversation any easier, for
no,
sure.
but definitely makes it more
But
necessary. Right,
yes.
right. And earlier today, I spoke about the fact that it really bothers me in a sense whenever I hear someone say, well, I did not want to intervene like with this situation or with this child because it's not my child. You know, I don't want to overstep. And I feel like a lot of times we miss the opportunity to protect children or to have these types of open conversations because we feel like it's not our place, if you will. So, Abba, can you talk a little bit about whose responsibility should it be, or is it, you know, in general, to talk to kids and to talk to the public about childhood sexual abuse? Is it like just up to the family? Do you feel like it's a community thing that we all should be engaging in?
So the thing is that I know just how prevalent it is, and
Right.
the prevalence of it creates and mind you, not just the prevalence of it, but also the impact
Mm,
that having experienced sexual abuse at an early age can have
right.
long term, way after, right?
Yeah.
So when a person intervenes and when the child feels heard, can help kind of propel them on that healing journey in a way that can help them find their voice and regain that sense of self control. Because a person can go years and years and years and years feeling shame and guilt about something that they did not even cause,
Right.
um,
Right.
and can be convinced that it was their fault and that they attracted this and all of these things for many, many years to come. And it can cause a lot of confusion and identity issues, even.
Yeah.
And understanding the impact, right? And that's the reason why I wanted to really start by really talking about like the impact that not intervening has on an individual and on the
Right.
healing journey. Like me personally, I was suffering in silence from age 4 to 21. It
Mhm.
wasn't until actually I began to first kind of have the consequences of my sexual trauma when I was 16. So when I was
Yeah.
16, I first began to have like consequences in terms of having negative coping skills, in terms of hypersexuality and different things like that,
Right.
which led to toxic relationships, domestic violence, and things of that nature, right? So
Right.
understanding that, like, not knowing and holding on to that shame and guilt can cause a lot more damage in terms of what we attract into our lives. And the attraction is in quotes because we don't ever really attract abuse,
Right.
but
Right.
in terms of what we tolerate, in terms of what we allow, right? Because if
Yeah.
we don't feel a sense of self-worth, if we don't feel like
Mm.
we are deserving of anything better, if we feel that shame and that guilt,
Right.
then if there's more likelihood that you will tolerate less than, that you will tolerate abuse, that you will tolerate someone having power over you
So
in a
true.
way that's very toxic, right? So, in
Mhm.
understanding the consequences of it, I think that it's everybody's
Yes.
responsibility.
Yes.
It doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter the person, doesn't matter the sex, doesn't matter. It is
Right.
everybody's responsibility to be able to speak up, to ask somebody, because in all actuality, even before a child expresses that something happened, right,
Right.
they're
Right.
constantly communicating in one way or another, either through nonverbal communication, through anger,
Right.
through some kind of way. There's some kind of shift that happens in the person. So whenever you see a shift in the way the person presents themselves, that's a good
Exactly.
opportunity to ask, is there something that happened, right? And
Exactly.
even if it's later on, right, it could be that there's something that happened and you didn't quite get it at age
Right.
3, and now the person is 6. It's okay to ask them at age 6, even though it was
Exactly.
years later.
Exactly.
It's fine, it's never too late to ask. I, years later, asked my son, was there any penetration that happened? You
Right.
told me that you watched pornographic videos with this other 5-year-old kid, but
Right.
I never asked whether there was anything else that happened because I might have missed
Mhm.
something because I was so focused on one thing that
Right.
I could have missed
Right.
something that was deeper. So now
Mhm.
here I am asking you this question. Yes, it is years later, but
Yeah.
it's now something that I'm recognizing that could have been something that was going on. So knowing that it's never too late to ask
Right.
is
Right.
also important. And it's no one's it shouldn't be a situation that it's not my monkey, not my circus. We are
Yeah.
a community, and each child that is sexually abused has long term consequences. And these consequences pass on from one generation to another, to another, to another. So it doesn't just
So
affect your
true.
community, but it affects you for generations to come. So it's
Right.
very important to intervene as earliest as possible and ask the right questions.
Mm.
And even if you don't ask the right questions, correct yourself, go back, double back,
Right. Right.
in a way that can be receptive, but not in a way that's interrogatory, but in a way that's compassionate, in a way that
Yeah.
doesn't cause more shame and guilt. Because the idea is, in order to liberate somebody, you have to be willing to move them away from that shame and that guilt and the anger and be
Right.
able to allow them to be free to express themselves, knowing that you did nothing wrong. You are believed, you are
Exactly.
worthy of speaking up. And guess what? This is not going to break you. It is a
Mhm.
situation that
So true.
happened. And unfortunately, it happens. And if you can even relate to the person and say, I too experienced this, so that that person doesn't feel alone, not to say make
Right.
anything up. Obviously, if you didn't, you didn't.
Right.
But
Right.
if you did, feel okay sharing that so that the person doesn't feel alone, so that they can feel comfortable sharing. And
So
again, not in a
true.
way that's interrogatory, it's totally
Right.
different,
Right.
um,
Yes.
but in a way that's very open and loving and concerned as well.
Yeah. And I think too, we have to also be careful not asking leading questions. And what I mean by that is, so for my personal experience, I too experienced sexual abuse under the age of 5. And it was actually by a relative. And so later in life, when I was about in the 8th grade, that relative actually went to jail for assaulting and abusing another child. And so my mom, at that time, she came up to me and she was just like, I've never asked you this, but I'm going to like find this strength and this courage to ask you. And her exact words, I will never forget it, was, he never did that to you, right? Like, because I know, like he never did that, like not to my baby. And it's just like, what space or what opportunity, are you giving the child in that moment when you're already somewhat answering the question for them? So I think we have to be careful, in how we word it then, because I definitely did not speak up at that time. When I heard it, I took a step back, like, well, wait, so it was right. Like she literally said right. So I don't want to like go against what my mom is saying, like in this moment. So it just put me in this weird dynamic. And instead of being able to speak my truth, at that time, I suppressed it even more. And I honestly, Abba, did not start even sharing my story or begin to remember it again until I went on this healing journey of trying to heal my thyroid and trying to like find my voice and just my inner courage, and that connection with self is what brought back all of these memories and what birthed Journey to Self and eventually birthed the Please Ask campaign. Because I'm like, it's important to ask, but let's not ask and answer at the same time, like let's literally provide space and safety in our questioning. So I'm glad you shared that, because it sparked that memory, and I'm like, wait, let's also point that out too. So yes.
Um, I did want to say too, just real quick, because when it comes to asking
Mhm.
questions, right? It's interesting because there are right and wrong ways to ask questions, and
Yeah.
leading questions is a wrong way to
Right.
ask a question, right? Um, one of the things to understand from a survivor, right,
Mhm.
is that we live with the guilt and the shame. We don't want to share that
Right.
suffering with
Right.
anybody because we know how heavy that burden is. So
Yeah.
oftentimes the reason why we don't speak up is because we don't want you to feel guilty or ashamed. So, for
Right.
example,
Right.
we don't want our mothers to feel like they did something wrong and that they now
Exactly.
have to feel guilty and ashamed of it, because what happens is that guilt and shame gets transferred, right?
Mhm.
So you want
Right.
to be very mindful to not further
Right?
make the situation worse by
Yeah.
now making this about you and your problems, right?
Right. Right.
My biggest challenge that I had with first coming up to my mother and speaking to her about my sexual abuse is that she made it about her and how it made her feel and
Yeah.
how all this stuff, right?
Right.
So
Right.
understand that the main reason why people who experience this level of suffering do not speak up is because we have created this resilience and the strength for us to hold on to this pain
Mhm.
all by ourselves.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to alleviate pain and suffering from other individuals, which is why oftentimes we birth such purposes and missions that have this impact on the world, right?
Right.
We end
Right.
up creating a light out of the darkness. We end up somehow finding a way to use the power of empathy to prevent
Mhm.
other people suffering. So the
So
last
true.
thing that we want to do is cause suffering. So when a survivor speaks to you and tells you their truth for the first time, you absolutely don't want to make it about you.
Right.
And you absolutely don't want to make this grandiose situation where now this weight is too much for you to carry. Because
Right.
one of the things that I say is that no survivor asked for this. No
Exactly.
survivor had a trigger warning.
Yeah.
Oh, watch out! Don't go into that room. Oh, watch
Right.
out! Stay away from this person. Right?
Yeah.
So, because there is no trigger warning, unfortunately, as survivors, we're constantly taught to walk on eggshells and to protect other people's feelings as a result of our lived experience.
Yeah.
So,
So
when we
true.
do speak, it can create this trickle effect of suffering that oftentimes will bring us back to a level of silence that makes us feel like this is exactly why I don't tell my story.
Right. Right.
So, you know, oh, I'm so sorry for you may not be the right
Exactly.
maybe silence. Maybe silence would
Right.
work in the spaces where you have that awkwardness, where you feel the need to feel sorry for them. It's like, no,
Yeah.
wow, like you made it here.
Exactly.
How did you, like, this is so amazing, you're so resilient, right? There's other ways to fill that space, that
So
awkward
true.
silence, and making the person feel like they're like feeling sorry for them is probably not the best way strategically to support somebody who's opening up for the very first time. And another thing that I want to say is, we said that no interrogation, right?
Right.
But it's also very important to let them know, I believe you.
Right.
Because one of the biggest challenges that still I struggle with to this
Yeah.
day, I struggle,
Yeah.
is that when I tell my story, no one's going to believe me.
Yeah.
They're not going to believe me because they don't want to make the family look or feel a certain way. They're not going to
Right.
want to believe that this person who's such a charming, whatever individual did
Right.
this, right? So I fear that I am not going to be believed.
Yeah.
So when a person tells you their story, tell
Mm.
them, I believe you. And there's something very powerful in that, because there is no proof. There's
Right.
no proof in that. And all we have is our memories. All we have is
Yeah.
our broken memories at that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and it's important to help that person feel heard,
Yeah.
and feel believed. So that's what, just a couple tips around
Right.
what you do
Very
ask. There
helpful
are
and
some
useful
right
tips.
and some wrong ways to
Right.
go about doing this that could help a person open up more or open up again with
Yeah.
somebody else.
Ah, I love it, Alba. Oh my gosh. Like, not only am I, going to leave this space just feeling more empowered to talk to my children, and even just check in with self, to see how I'm progressing along my healing journey. But I can only imagine just the type of information and support you've been able to provide to our viewers. So, of course, we will have the pleasure of hearing from you on multiple days throughout this week. Why did you agree to be a part of our Please Ask campaign, and why do you feel that it's so needed?
Well, I feel like I just answered it in the entire interview,
Right.
right? The impact of not speaking our truth clearly
Yeah.
has medical consequences, right?
Right.
It has relational consequences, it has emotional
Right.
consequences, and it
Parenting
has some
consequences.
parenting consequences, some transgenerational consequences, right? It has so many consequences when we don't
Yeah.
speak up, when we don't tell our truth. And there's so many individuals in the world that are suffering in silence. And
So many.
my purpose, or part of my calling, has been to be able to help liberate individuals to be
Mhm.
able to speak their truth and stand in their power that was never taken from them, right?
Right.
So it's to
Right.
no longer believe the lie that when that person took a part of your body, that they took your power along with them, that they took your voice along with them, right? So it's
Exactly.
just remembering who you are, remembering that you had that power all along. So, as a part of my calling and as a part of my passion, it just
Mm-hmm.
so happened that our passions and journeys happen to cross paths in a very
Right.
divinely orchestrated way.
Yeah.
And again, it's an honor to be here. And it's almost like a no brainer. Like, of course, I'll do this. Of course, this is important,
Yeah.
for all of the reasons that I stand for and all of the reasons that I have suffered in silence and no longer want other people to do the same thing, which is
Right.
why I created my business and you created your business. So it just so happens that it's like, it
Right.
makes sense.
Yes, it all works out. I'm so happy, that you are sharing your journey with us, and also allowing your healing, to be of support and of guidance and just of motivation, and empowerment to others who have also experienced childhood sexual abuse. So, for everyone who is watching right now, who are eager to continue to connect with you, maybe support you, get more offline guidance from you, how can they connect with you? How can they follow your journey after today?
So, one is on social media. My social media accounts on Facebook and Instagram is Alba
Okay.
Soto TLC.
Okay.
And my website is albasototlc.com. And I also have a podcast called Trauma Liberación con Alba Soto, which is a bilingual podcast where I feature survivors who tell their story in order to help uplift, and empower others. And it's some survivors in English and some survivors in Spanish, and that podcast can be found on Spotify as well as it's featured on my website. Also, yeah.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to tag that in our post too. That way everyone could have easy access. And to everyone who is viewing right now, thank you so much for watching. Y'all, this is just day one. Throughout the remainder of the week, we will get a chance to focus on how childhood sexual abuse affects us, whether that's emotionally, physically, spiritually. We'll also get a chance to take take a look at the characteristics of offenders and spend a significant amount of time discussing the importance of healing. So be sure to continue to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, in order to just not miss out on these very healing conversations. And thank you so much, Aba, for sharing your time, sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. I am looking forward to digging deeper as the campaign continues. Thank you. Peace, everyone.